Captain Alex Carter stood at the edge of the command deck, watching the alien skyline burn with distant fires. The battle had moved on, the human fleet victorious once again in its relentless campaign across the stars. But his mind wasn't on glory or the praise that would inevitably follow. Instead, he stared out toward a single devastated quadrant of the alien city, a section barely mentioned in the tactical briefings. It held no strategic value, just ruins and silence. Except he had intercepted one message. A distress beacon on a forgotten frequency. Short, broken, but unmistakable. Children's voices. His orders were clear: return to the dropship, regroup with the battalion, and prepare for orbital departure. The planet was won. The city was in ruins. But Carter couldn't turn away from the voices. His squad was gone, either reassigned or casualties of the war. He had no command, no backup, and no time. Still, something inside him refused to let go. The last time he had ignored that instinct, it had cost lives. He remembered Earth, a night long ago when a fire had gutted the residential block back home. He'd been off duty, exhausted, told himself someone else would respond. But no one came. 3 families had died that night. Among them, a boy not much older than his brother had been. That guilt had never left him, not even after joining the Earth Federation forces and earning his way up the ranks. And now, here it was again, an echo of that same failure, begging for a different ending. He checked his rifle, slid the last power cell into place, and turned away from the evac route. Command could court-martial him later, if he lived. The streets below were crawling with bioscanners and heat signatures, mostly enemy remnants retreating into underground bunkers. It didn't matter. He had a rough fix on the coordinates. That was enough. He moved fast through the crumbled streets, past fallen statues of alien leaders and flickering monoliths of Varnak architecture. Every few steps, he caught signs of the chaos: melted armor plates, shredded flags, collapsed buildings still groaning under the weight of destruction. The horror wasn't just in the visuals. It was in the absence of sound, in the eerie, suffocating quiet that replaced the once bustling city. A silence broken only by distant sobs on a loop from the beacon he carried. He avoided enemy patrols where he could, dispatched stragglers where he couldn't. It wasn't about the fight, it was about time. He didn't know how many children there were. Maybe 2, maybe 20. All he knew was they were alive. That was enough to keep moving. By the time he reached the half-collapsed bridge overlooking the quadrant, his body ached, suit covered in grime, blood that wasn't all his own streaked across the plating. Below, nestled between scorched buildings and half a dome of cracked glass, he saw the signal tower. The source of the broadcast. The building beside it, charred, blackened, but still standing, bore the unmistakable shape of an alien creche. A nursery. His pulse slowed. This was it. He climbed down the wreckage, scanning for signs of life, sensors alert for movement. The moment he reached the door, he hesitated. Not out of fear for himself, but fear of what he might find. Too late? Just silence and ash? Or worse, a trap laid with cruel precision by the enemy? He pushed through. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and dust. Collapsed beams angled across the hallway, the floor cracked and warped. But he heard it now. Faint whimpers. Breathing. Movement. He turned a corner and froze. 5 children. Maybe 6. Small, green-skinned Varnaks, their features twisted in fear, eyes wide as they clung to one another in the dark. One looked barely old enough to stand. Another had a blood-soaked bandage wrapped clumsily around their leg. And all of them stared at him like they were waiting for a monster. He knelt slowly, dropping his weapon to the ground. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, knowing they wouldn't understand. "I came for you." None moved. He reached into his belt, pulled out a ration bar, and placed it in front of him. A gesture, nothing more. Still, one child crawled forward, hesitated, then grabbed it and retreated. A moment later, the others followed. Not toward him, but not away either. It was enough. He ran diagnostics on his HUD, calculating weight loads, route options, structural weaknesses. It was going to be hell getting them out. But it was possible. Barely. He tapped a quick message to his command unit, encrypted, buried beneath emergency frequencies. Carter. Non-combatants located. Request extraction delay. He didn't expect a reply. They moved out an hour later, the children following him like shadows. The city's heart still smoldered around them. He carried the smallest one in his arms, another clung to his side. Every noise sent them flinching. Once, a falling piece of rubble caused one to scream, triggering a panic that nearly gave away their position. But Carter stayed calm. His voice steady, his steps deliberate. He remembered how his mother used to soothe him in the dark, humming songs in the middle of the storm. He did the same now, quiet words in a language they didn't know, but which somehow calmed them all the same. By the time they reached the edge of the blast zone, his legs burned, his chest ached, and his vision blurred with sweat and blood. But the children were alive. Every last one of them. He couldn't carry them all the way to the evac site, but he didn't need to. Reinforcements were coming. He had made sure of it, even if it meant calling in a favor from a long-retired general who owed him his life. As the first dropship came into view, Carter finally let himself fall to one knee. The children crowded around him. One of them reached up and gently touched the side of his helmet. Not out of fear, but gratitude. He removed the helmet slowly, revealing tired eyes and a dust-streaked face. And for the first time, the smallest child smiled. Carter didn't smile back. Not yet. There was still too much left to do. But inside, something eased. A part of him that had stayed frozen for years began to thaw. He had come here to fight a war. But he would leave remembered not as a soldier, but as the man who brought hope to the children of their enemy. The debrief was brief and cold. Carter stood before the panel of Earth Federation officials, their expressions unreadable, their voices clipped and efficient. They questioned his deviation from protocol, the delay in evacuation, and the risk posed to mission integrity. He answered calmly, detailing his discovery of the alien children and the circumstances surrounding their rescue. No embellishments, no theatrics, just the facts. The room was silent when he finished. Then they dismissed him with no commendation, no reprimand, just a simple order: return to active duty. The war wasn't over. There was always another battle. Back aboard the ship, the atmosphere was different. Word had spread. His fellow soldiers, usually reserved and hardened, nodded as he passed. Not with pity or mockery, but with a quiet respect that didn't need words. The children were safe. Medical had confirmed their condition was stable, and temporary quarters had been prepared for them in a restricted area of the humanitarian sector. It was an unusual move, allowing enemy species aboard a military vessel, but higher command had granted it. Probably for optics, Carter thought. Still, it meant they were out of danger, for now. He visited the children the next day, unsure what to expect. They looked at him with cautious recognition, their fear faded but not forgotten. A young alien girl, the one with the wounded leg, approached him with an awkward gait and handed him a small, broken trinket. A symbol, perhaps, of their people. He didn't understand it, but he accepted it with quiet reverence. Something had changed between them. He wasn't just a human soldier anymore. He was their protector. Despite the horror they'd witnessed, the children began to heal. Slowly, awkwardly, but noticeably. Medical staff did what they could, offering food, treatment, and a routine. But it was Carter they trusted most. He became their anchor. He taught them basic words in English. They responded in fractured syllables, mimicking him, laughing sometimes when he fumbled their names. It wasn't much, but it was connection. News of the event reached Earth weeks later, carried not by official briefings, but by leaked footage from a drone cam, Carter carrying one child while another clung to his armor, ash and flame in the background. The image went viral. Humanity, long painted as aggressors in this endless conflict, suddenly had a new narrative. A story of compassion amidst war. People debated it endlessly. Was it genuine heroism or a staged moment for political gain? Carter ignored it all. He didn't care about the public debate. The war was still raging, and he had a duty to uphold. Command reassigned him to a quieter zone temporarily, perhaps to keep him from the spotlight, or maybe as a subtle punishment for disobedience. It didn't matter. He accepted it without complaint. In the meantime, a diplomatic envoy from the Varnak remnants reached out. An intercepted message, translated through multiple AIs, requested information about the human who saved the children. There was no anger in the message. Only acknowledgement. The political machinery turned fast after that. Earth Federation leaders saw an opportunity, an opening for dialogue where once there had been none. For the first time in a decade, an envoy meeting was scheduled between human and Varnak representatives. The children were cited as the catalyst. Carter's name was whispered behind every closed door. Yet he wasn't invited to the talks. He wasn't a politician. He remained a soldier, doing his rounds, repairing equipment, keeping his head down. The meetings dragged on for weeks, then months. Meanwhile, Carter watched as the children grew more confident, their injuries healed, their silence replaced by small games and whispered songs in their native tongue. They began drawing, creating strange murals on their quarters' walls, images of stars, fire, and a tall human figure with outstretched hands. They began calling him something in their language. The translators struggled with it, but one term came up repeatedly. Karevnash. It meant, guardian of the small. One day, an officer delivered a sealed message to Carter's quarters. It was short. Prepare for reassignment. High clearance diplomatic mission. Voluntary. The destination was not listed. But he knew. The talks had reached a point where human leadership wanted a show of goodwill. And who better than the soldier who'd risked everything? He agreed without hesitation. The journey to the neutral zone was uneventful. The diplomatic vessel was quiet, filled with men and women in suits, their faces strained by endless meetings and delicate wordplay. Carter kept to himself. He wasn't here to speak. He was here to stand. When he finally entered the diplomatic hall, tall and circular, constructed jointly by human and Varnak engineers, he felt every eye turned toward him. At the center of the room, behind reinforced glass and protective guards, stood a group of Varnak elders. Their faces were unreadable, alien in every sense, but one of them stepped forward. She extended her arm, fingers splayed, a gesture of peace among their kind. Carter matched it, bowing slightly. No words were exchanged. None were needed. After the ceremony, he learned something astonishing. The children he had rescued were to be sent back to what remained of Varnak civilization, not to orphanages or military programs, but to live as symbols. They would be storytellers, witnesses, carriers of a different memory, that even in war, mercy could exist. The Federation offered Carter a promotion. A desk job. Safer. Political. He declined. Instead, he requested to return to active duty, but on humanitarian missions. Rescues. Medical drops. Evacuations. They agreed, quietly and without argument. His image had become more powerful than any speech or campaign. Over time, Carter's name faded from the headlines. The war continued in other sectors, peace talks stalled, progress was slow. But in pockets of the galaxy stories spread. Not of weapons or battles, but of a man who walked through fire to save children he did not know. Of hands extended in the darkness. Of hope. And on a quiet colony years later, a group of alien children taught their human classmates a word from their lost language. Karevnash. The teachers asked what it meant. The children simply smiled. The mission following Carter's reassignment was nothing like he'd faced before. The environment was labeled unstable, but no one mentioned the eerie silence that haunted the region. His new ship, the Lysander, was assigned to patrol derelict sectors abandoned since the early stages of the war. Entire colonies gone dark, their populations vanished without trace. The purpose was to investigate, secure survivors if any, and report on anomalies. The crew was small, mostly medics, analysts, and reconnaissance officers, and morale was low. Everyone had heard rumors. Ships entering the zone often didn't return. Those that did carried stories that didn't make sense. On their third pass near a shattered moon, they received a distress signal. Faint, encrypted in an old Varnak code. Carter recognized the pattern immediately. It was the same cadence used in the children's whisper chants. The same code they'd mimicked from their parents. Despite protocol, he pushed for an immediate course adjustment. Command hesitated, citing risk. He pressed harder, leveraging his reputation. They gave in. The planet was scarred. No orbital defenses, no welcoming beacon. Just a dark sky and fractured terrain. The buildings had collapsed long ago, twisted metal reaching from the ground like bones. Yet the signal pulsed from beneath the surface. Carter and 2 others descended with portable scanners and hazard suits. The deeper they went, the more wrong everything felt. Light bent strangely. Machinery seemed fused with organic material. Time lagged behind their steps. They reached what once was a shelter dome, now a nest of twisted architecture. It was there that they found them. Not people. Remnants. The Varnak who had remained behind had not survived war. They had been consumed by something else. Their bodies were distorted, their minds gone. Yet something of their culture remained, etched in murals, scratched into walls, repeated in looping audio files that played broken lullabies in the background. Carter uploaded all data. It was evidence of something beyond war, a corruption that didn't discriminate between species. He wanted to leave, but the signal persisted deeper still. Against orders, Carter advanced alone. He reached the signal's origin, a chamber filled with pods. Not unlike the one he had rescued the children from. These, however, were darker. Sealed. But not dead. The moment he stepped closer, the temperature dropped. A presence awakened. Not Varnak. Not human. Something ancient and furious. An entity feeding on fear and memory. The children Carter had saved, he saw flashes of them in his mind. Their suffering. Their pain. The alien presence latched onto those memories. It communicated not through words, but emotion. Rage. Loss. Hunger. It had fed on the dying remnants of war-torn species. It saw Carter as both threat and opportunity. He should have fled. But one pod blinked faintly. A child. Not Varnak. Something else. Hybrid? He wasn't sure. But it breathed. Carter fought back against the presence, not with weapons, but with focus. He spoke aloud, recounting every name, every child he had rescued. He forced his will against the entity, grounding himself in memory and duty. The connection weakened. He tore open the pod and pulled the child free. It coughed, blinked, and stared at him, not in terror, but recognition. He escaped, carrying the child through collapsing tunnels and walls that moved like flesh. The extraction team was shocked to see him return alive. Command ordered immediate isolation and scans. The entity had not followed, but the scans revealed something unsettling. Carter had been altered. Exposure to the alien presence had left a mark. Neurological patterns changed, heightened sensitivity to emotion, increased cognitive response. He was still human. But not the same. The child recovered quickly. It didn't speak, but observed everything with intense, glowing eyes. No known species matched its DNA. Carter refused to allow it to be taken by research teams. He invoked diplomatic immunity from his previous commendation, citing potential threats. Reluctantly, they agreed to temporary custody. Over time, the child began mimicking Carter's behavior. It learned faster than any human or Varnak child. It adapted to Earth language, absorbing knowledge at a pace that frightened even the researchers. But it only responded to Carter. It followed him, trusted him, mimicked his speech patterns. Carter knew it was not fully organic. Part synthetic, perhaps bioengineered. But it had emotions. It remembered the pain. And more importantly, it feared the entity below. Carter proposed a full lockdown of the derelict region, arguing that the war had distracted them from a far greater threat. The entity wasn't interested in territory. It was interested in trauma. It had awoken in the aftermath of annihilation. Wherever emotional ruin lingered, it grew stronger. Command hesitated. Politics were complicated. Resources stretched thin. Carter didn't wait. He compiled a full report, paired with footage and sensor data, and leaked it anonymously to multiple planetary networks. Within days, the story exploded. The footage of him emerging from the void with the hybrid child in his arms became the new symbol. Not of war, but of something else. Something haunting. His warnings were impossible to ignore now. The entity became a matter of priority. The Federation launched a task force, not for peacekeeping, but for containment. The child, meanwhile, began speaking in full sentences. It referred to itself as Ray. When asked what it remembered, Ray answered simply, pain. Then light. Then you. Carter understood what that meant. It wasn't about rescue. It was about meaning. Ray had imprinted on him not because of survival, but because of presence. He had walked into the horror, refused to abandon even the unknown, and emerged not as a savior, but as a bearer of hope. Other colonies began reporting emotional anomalies. Ghost signals. Echoes of fear. The Federation began to understand that the war had created more than political scars. Something metaphysical had awakened in the wreckage. And Carter, altered, marked, connected, was the only one who had returned from the heart of it alive. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He had become something different. Not a leader, not a prophet, but a witness. And in his care was a child who might one day explain everything. Not with science, but with understanding. The war had changed. But so had the rules. And Carter, once forgotten, once dismissed, was now the thread connecting the fading past with the uncertain future. Not because he sought it, but because he chose compassion over command. Again. And again. Carter was brought before a classified review board within the Strategic Galactic Committee. The hybrid child Ray, now under high-level observation, remained in his custody due to a rare clause in the Unified Sentience Accord, granting special guardianship rights to recognized saviors in cross-species rescue operations. The board questioned him not just about the creature or the anomaly beneath the ruined moon, but about his exposure, what he felt, what he saw, how it changed him. They feared contamination, psychic compromise, even ideological subversion. Carter answered with precision, avoiding speculation and focusing on facts. But inside, he knew something had shifted irreversibly. The child wasn't an anomaly, it was a message. A product of agony and resilience, born of extinction and yet undeniably alive. Ray had abilities beyond comprehension. It processed emotion, responded to subtle changes in electromagnetic fields, and could instinctively predict outcomes from patterns of behavior. Intelligence agencies saw a threat. Defense councils wanted to dissect it. Carter made one thing clear: no harm would come to Ray. Not while he breathed. Pressure mounted as galactic media caught hold of the leaked footage and Carter's growing influence. Civilian populations, especially those who had suffered loss during the war, began to identify with Ray. The child became a symbol not of alien terror but of shared pain. Across the Federation, public opinion shifted. Questions turned toward accountability. What other horrors had been hidden beneath the pretense of war? Why had so many derelict zones remained unexplored for years? The truth that a non-corporeal entity fed on emotional trauma created unease among citizens already disillusioned by conflict. Carter's name was now linked with the movement. Not by his doing, but by necessity. Research teams quietly discovered that Ray emitted a low-frequency pulse that seemed to suppress the neural pathways activated by grief and terror. The effect wasn't strong enough to heal, but it calmed those in its vicinity. Veterans slept better. Children cried less. Empaths felt clarity. Whatever Ray was, it radiated balance. More intriguing, it sought no control, no dominance, no escape. It only wanted to learn, connect, and stay near Carter. He underwent neurological tests. Results showed his brainwave activity had aligned with Ray's during their exposure to the anomaly. They were linked in a way no known science could replicate. The data was inconclusive, but one theory stood out: Ray had chosen Carter not by chance, but because his empathy had created a safe tether during the moment of psychic intrusion. That tether may have allowed Ray to develop a stable consciousness. Where others died or went mad in the anomaly's presence, Carter endured. Not because of strength, but because of emotional resilience. The Federation created a covert directive to build an emotion suppression network, a kind of psychic firewall, to shield frontier systems from further incursions by similar entities. They asked Carter for assistance. He agreed, on one condition: Ray would remain protected, free, and unstudied without consent. He became not only an advisor but a living bridge between policy and conscience. Months passed, and Ray grew rapidly. Not just in size but intellect. It began creating symbols, blending Varnak, human, and other known scripts into complex cognitive art. When decrypted, some of these designs contained accurate predictions: solar flares, infrastructure breakdowns, even geopolitical shifts. Ray wasn't just intelligent. It was tuned into something beneath reality's surface, something shaped by pain and shaped again by hope. Carter brought Ray to Earth under strict supervision for an address before the United Assembly. The hybrid, clothed simply and standing silently beside him, didn't speak. Carter did. He spoke not as a soldier but as a human who had once stood alone in the dark and had chosen not to abandon those who couldn't speak for themselves. He reminded them that the war's legacy wasn't just ruins and names on walls. It was unresolved grief. And if something fed on that grief, they had a duty, not just to destroy it, but to understand why it thrived. The speech became historic. Not for its drama, but its restraint. It didn't ask for sympathy. It demanded responsibility. Veterans cried. Scientists debated. Politicians stalled. But the people moved. Advocacy groups, reform organizations, trauma response programs all rallied under the banner of what became known as the Ray Initiative. It wasn't about the hybrid anymore. It was about acknowledging the invisible scars that fed monsters. Behind closed doors, the Federation elite remained uneasy. Ray was too unpredictable. Carter, too influential. Rumors spread of assassination orders, secret containment facilities. Carter anticipated this. He released a second wave of footage, this time of the derelict structures twisting and regenerating on their own, clearly mimicking the neural architecture of known species. The implication was terrifying. If the entity could replicate structures from thoughts, it could infiltrate minds. Carter revealed that Ray had protected him from this, not the other way around. The entity had tried to manipulate his memories, but Ray had stabilized them. That revelation shifted the narrative entirely. Ray wasn't a threat. Ray was the cure. Federation command relented. Ray and Carter were granted sanctuary aboard a retrofitted exploration vessel, the Solace, fitted with shielding tech, diplomatic override systems, and neural dampeners. Their mission: to locate other derelict zones, assess risk, and establish contact if any form of sentience remained. But more than that, to track the spread of the trauma-fed entity and build defenses rooted not in weaponry, but understanding. Some saw Carter as a traitor to his species, too close to alien influence. Others saw him as humanity's evolution, someone who chose compassion over conquest, who walked through the ruins not to claim, but to remember. Ray spoke only once during the launch ceremony, placing a small hand on Carter's and looking into the cameras. "He did not leave me. I will never leave him." That moment was broadcast across over 50 systems. It was brief. But the weight of that sentence reshaped galactic dialogue. Trust, once broken by war, began stitching itself together, not through treaties, but through example. Carter didn't seek legacy. He sought peace. Not the kind written in documents or signed by leaders, but the kind that lives in small moments, when someone stops to listen, when a child is not abandoned, when an alien voice is not feared, but welcomed. And through Ray, that peace slowly found a voice. The mission of Carter and Ray aboard the Solace began quietly. Despite the political storms surrounding their presence, they traveled system to system, mapping the psychic echoes left behind by the war. These weren't traditional battlefields but spiritual voids, dead space where life once thrived and now pulsed with emotional residue. Their ship's systems, fused with Ray's biometrics, could detect the weak frequencies emitted from such zones. These weren't random signals. They were cries. Fragments of pain caught in loops, decaying like lost memories. The first anomaly they studied was in the Uranus belt, where a once thriving colony vanished without record. Scans showed no signs of conflict, only a synchronized failure of neurofunction in every sentient being. Ray confirmed the entity's presence but noted a key change. It no longer hunted, it lingered. Observing. Waiting. It had begun to evolve. Carter submitted this discovery with urgency. They had hoped to stay ahead of the threat, but it was clear the entity was adapting, feeding off distant wars now through emotional residue alone. They pushed farther, reaching the border zones of former Varnak space. Here, derelicts floated like skeletal remains of civilizations too ashamed to rebuild. The psychic presence was stronger. Carter began experiencing fractured dreams, memories that were not his, fears that felt foreign yet deeply rooted. Ray monitored him, shielding where possible. Each encounter left Carter more hollowed, but also more driven. Ray learned to anchor his thoughts, redirecting emotional spikes into stabilized signals. Their bond deepened, not just as protector and guardian, but as co-survivors of something no science could fully define. Reports from other expeditions began filtering in. Some found ruins similar to those Carter had discovered under the moon, impossible architecture designed to imprison thought rather than matter. In 2 cases, entire crews vanished, leaving only broadcast loops of recorded laughter and sobbing. The emotional spectrum itself had become a weapon, and Ray theorized the entity could now replicate emotional states remotely, infecting ships like a virus made of memory. The Federation grew desperate. Plans for weaponizing Ray resurfaced, despite Carter's opposition. The Solace received encrypted messages warning of a shift in leadership priorities. They wanted results, not studies. Containment, not compassion. Carter refused. He knew any attempt to control Ray would provoke both the child and the entity. They had become opposing reflections, one seeking connection, the other devouring it. Ray understood this, too. It was why the child refused to sleep during jumps through psychic zones. The entity would try to speak then, try to extract meaning through dreams. Ray kept it at bay. One night, deep in the Kareth cluster, they encountered a signal that stopped everything. A child's voice, calling out in the exact tone Ray used when it had first spoken to Carter. Not a recording. Not a replay. A new voice. Somewhere out there, another hybrid existed. Created by the same entity or something worse. Ray froze, whispering, "It's calling me home." Carter made the decision instantly. They would follow. Coordinates were triangulated. The origin point was a dying star system, long stripped of any strategic value. As they entered orbit around a shattered moon, the readings went silent. Not just quiet, absent. Ray's presence began to flicker. Its form destabilized. Whatever had been calling wasn't another like Ray, it was a mimic. A psychic construct designed to bait empathy and unravel cognition. Ray had been the test subject. This new voice was the trap. Carter activated every failsafe. Ray insisted they leave, that staying meant risking more than just death. But Carter saw something deeper. Beneath the mimic's false voice, he heard the genuine one again, quiet, hidden beneath layers of copied fear. There really was another. They dug through the crust of the moon using advanced tunneling drones and discovered the remains of a sanctuary, likely Varnak in origin, shielding what appeared to be an artificial womb. Inside, another child, not identical, but similar, floated in stasis. Weak. Fragile. But alive. As they extracted the being, the entity struck. Not physically, but through Carter's mind. It flooded him with all the deaths he had ever witnessed. Voices of those he couldn't save. Ray screamed, placing a hand to Carter's temple, synchronizing their emotional frequency. In that moment, their pain aligned and neutralized the psychic attack. The mimic faded, starved by the very bond it tried to exploit. The second child awoke, blinking slowly, and looked directly at Ray. Not with fear, but with recognition. Carter named her Elian. When they returned to the Federation, they were no longer questioned. Not out of trust, but out of fear. Ray and Elian, linked psychically, now formed a pattern. The entity's attacks waned. Its power fractured. It became clear that these children weren't accidents, they were fail-safes. Not just products of grief, but antibodies forged in the darkest corners of sentient suffering. They were not born of death, but of survival. The Federation officially acknowledged Carter's mission. He was appointed as Ambassador of Cross-Species Trauma Reconciliation. An awkward title, but one with reach. With Ray and Elian by his side, he visited worlds broken by war. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their presence calmed, clarified, and slowly rekindled belief that survival didn't have to mean forgetting. Years passed. Ray grew into something beyond humanoid, elegant, translucent, resonating thought as light. Elian followed, her form more grounded, analytical, precise. Together, they formed a psychic anchor network across 10 systems. Attacks from the entity ceased completely. Some say it died. Others say it changed. Carter didn't care. He had seen enough of fear. What mattered now was the proof that even from the ashes of horror, beauty could rise. He retired quietly, settling on a peaceful moon overlooking a Red Sea. Ray and Elian visited often. They didn't need to speak. A touch, a look, a memory was enough. And in those moments, Carter felt peace, not because the galaxy had healed, but because he had chosen not to look away when it cried out. He hadn't saved the galaxy. He had simply refused to abandon what others deemed unworthy of saving. And in return, the galaxy had changed. Forever.